Join us as we celebrate 150 years of African American history in Champaign, next on Illinois Pioneers. There's been a vibrant African American community in Champaign for the city's entire history. As Illinois Pioneers continues its celebration of Champaign's 150th year, we examine the African American history from a unique perspective. We welcome two members of one of Champaign's oldest and best documented families, Estella Merrifield and her sister Hester Suggs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
From where did your family migrate to Champaign?
Well, some came from Tennessee. Some came to Champaign from Homer. One section came from Tennessee to Homer, and then to Champaign. And another section came from North Carolina. Is it North Carolina? Yeah. And then some of them came from, we're here, I'm not exactly sure.
Sure.
Others came in later, but.
About when was that?
About 1865, 1864.
Let's take a look at a map here on the screen and give us some idea of where the family came from. And there we have the areas of the country where they came from. In the next picture, you mentioned this already, that some of your ancestors stayed in Homer, and that's actually a picture of Homer Park.
Yes, that is Homer Park, and my mother was William Frank Ernest. The Ernest family was in Homer, and the Frank Ernest's Uncle Frank, he was named for one of, the older. But they moved from Homer to Champaign because of the fact that Mother wanted them to go to university, and Homer only went to the second year of high school. And so they moved to Champaign so they could finish. And then Uncle Frank went on to University of Illinois, and then of course, Mother, she graduated from high school here. And my sister, Hester, you have something to say to that?
Well, they just, Frank needed to go to the University of Illinois, and in fact, he was killed while he was, one of the pillars at Memorial Stadium has his name on it, because he was one of those that was killed at the First World War.
We'll talk about the history of your family in public service and in the military as we go along, because that's very interesting. Let's look at the next image that we have here for us. That's actually a picture of Estella, and then we'll switch to the next one.
Yeah.
That is a
Hester
picture
and Eugene
of Hester.
Suggs.
Thank you.
So we want people to recognize you from your time in history. Let's look at the next image from that we have here. One of the earliest of the African American settlers in Champaign was a man by the name of Roy Gillespie.
Yes, he was part of our family. He was married to my aunt, and they lived in Homer. The Gillespie family.
So they were in Homer as well.
Yes, the original ones were.
And the next image we have goes to that history that your family has with the military. This is a gentleman by the name of Jordan Anderson.
Well, Jordan Anderson, they first lived in Anderson, and then they came on to, but that's my great-great-grandfather and great-great-great-grandfather. And the connections are, I don't know whether he was the one that was in the war. It was her second husband, his wife's, after he died. She married George Popin's great uncle. he was in the Civil War.
So this is a Civil War image. Let's move to the next image that we have, that's of the 369th Division out of Danville in World War I. And Hester,
Right.
What can you tell us about this?
Well, my dad was in that particular thing. That was Cecil Nelson, and also Frank Ernest. And I'm not sure exactly, I can't really exactly see which one was him at this particular time. But I also have a picture that shows the barracks And I used it many different times with school children because we could tell we were looking at the different kinds of conditions that were there. We saw people Negroes in that particular time, who had cars and horse and buggy, and Dad had. It's all rolled up at this particular time because that's the way that they kept the portraits at that time.
I think some of us have the impression that blacks at that time in World War I, it was not a fully integrated military, of course, but that they had jobs in the supply line. But this was a fighting unit.
That was a fighting
unit. It suffered
unit.
casualties.
Right.
It was a unit that was connected with the French units. When they got overseas, they went in with the French. And that just about 8 or 10 of them on there had the curly gear for, they were honored in battle.
And there were fatalities.
Yes, and Uncle Frank, that's William Frank Ernest. I have a picture of him. I didn't give it to you. But anyway, he was killed overseas, and Dad was with them at the time. And that's where we get the William F. Ernest post from. Because Dr. L.P. DeFay and Dr. Ellis, their pictures are on there. I can't point them out
exactly. Let's go to the next image, because you mentioned the post, the American Legion post.
Now that's my father in the center.
And he was county commander.
He was a county commander then. And
the American Legion post has been a significant part of the social fabric of the African American community in Champaign for a long time.
A long time.
Ever since I think they formed about 1932, 33, somewhere when they first, that was later, because most of them, when they came back, they had to go to work to support their families and whatnot.
And the fellow here on the end is Alvin Foxwell.
Yeah, that's Alvin Foxwell, and let's see who else is on. That's the county group there. That particular picture is the county group of the American Legion.
And if you notice, my dad has a copy of the Croix de Guerre on his
the purple
helmet.
hearts on one side, the Croix de Guerre's up on the top, and he was the most decorated man in the at the Champaign County. I don't know how many had. They used to have the decorations up. I still have the Croix de Guerre.
It was very interesting when the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross on our front yard. My dad said they could walk out there in the street all that they wanted to because that was public property. But he had his sharpshooting medal, and we had the papers go with it. And so he was a very forceful individual.
Not to be toyed with.
You're
No,
right, to
he
be
wasn't
toyed
to be
with.
toyed with.
That he knew his rights, and he studied the Blue Book, the old Illinois Blue Book that had all the laws on it, and he was very patriotic, but he was also he had responsibility as well as an idea for recourse to some of the things, and that really helped us kids all the way along because he was such a strong individual.
Well, the next image also goes to the history that your family has of public service. Describe this for us.
Well, that's the Sheriff's Department, Champaign County Sheriff's Department, and that's about around 1989. Just about the turn of the century.
Oh, okay.
But that's my grandfather. On the first row there, and next to the one in the end, the one with the mustache.
He's on the right side of the
That's
dog.
Grandpa Ernest. He's my grandfather.
So even back around 1900.
Yeah, that's what's Nelson, Joseph Nelson, and he had grocery store. After he retired from that, he opened his own stores on North Fifth Street and
North Hickory.
North Hickory Street.
So he was the first black on the
He was
Sheriff's
the only
Department?
black on the Sheriff's Department. And,
But if you look at him, you can see how they made him a sheriff, just by his complexion and the way he sort of fit in with the whole group.
He didn't cause any problems. Half the people didn't know that he was black.
The next image helps us kind of define where some of the neighborhoods where there was no one African American neighborhood
No,
historically.
there wasn't.
There were several.
There's one on South,
Ells Avenue.
Ells Avenue, yes, in that area. That's in South Champaign. Then there was one on Western Champaign, what we called Plum Nelly. But it was Anthony Jones, a boxer. His folks all they lived out there, and the Pope family lived out there. Then there was another group that lived where we lived. Well, there was a very small enclave there on Church Street, and it had about 5 or 6 families, and Poor Boys, that area around where Columbia Street comes into Market Street, that was there. And then as you go north, most of them lived north of the tracks and north of the Big 4 tracks and east of the Illinois Central.
But there was also a group there
And
that
there
lived along Stoughton Avenue, the Welleses and the Watsons.
Right.
And on...
But that's in Urbana.
well, no, we had the Watsons and Doc Claire Smith.
Well, there's quite a few in it. There was an enclave across Wright Street there. People moved into that area, too.
What tied those neighborhoods together?
Our churches, the churches. There were several churches, but all of them more or less worked together. And we would have groups, singing groups, who'd go from one church to the next church to the next church. And we knew all of the ministers. And there was Salem on Park Street corner. And then there was the AME churches on Park, and we were on Park and Fourth. And Park and Fifth was the Salem church. And then up north, up in this area, up in here, there was Mount Olive, was up north on 4th Street, way north. And then there was Pilgrim Church, was down near the Oak Ash Division, that they call it now. There was Pilgrim there. And then, of course, Free Will was right across over in Urbana.
Let's take a look at the next image, because that helps us discuss the churches a little bit. This is
Bethlehem Church. That's back around, right after the turn of the century. That's back around the early 1900s. And they had their own band, and Irma Scott's father was our director, and Cecil Pope's father was the organist, later on. And these boys most of them belonged to the Baraka Club, like Irma probably told you, and most of them went to University of Illinois, a lot of them went to university. And these are the people that lived around there.
And the next image is a painting of that AME church.
Yeah, that's how the church looked. This one was built in 1900. And this is where the AME church is today. They took that down. Now, that painting was done by my brother, Cecil Nelson. He was a bronze tablet winner at the University of Illinois. He went on, became a famous artist. But he did this when he was 15 years old. And that's how the church looked before, without those people sitting in front of it.
Take a look at the next image, which is another of the churches, the Salem Baptist Church.
That's Salem Baptist Church, and it was built about the same time. They all began in we were 146 years 2 years ago.
Oh my.
Salem's 142 years or 143 years. And they used to argue who was the first church built. But they didn't have this front on it at this time. They remodeled it. And now if you have the next picture of Salem, my husband went to Salem, and I went to Bethel. And so...
Well, let's look at the next picture then.
Okay,
I believe we have is St.
You
Louis.
don't have the other pictures.
No, we had to cut some out for time.
Well,
but this is
the
St.
modern Salem, both of them are still there.
Mm-hmm.
Both churches.
How important, Hester, was and is the black church in the community?
Well, the black church was not only the social hub of the community, it was also an educational hub of the community, as many activities were conducted at the black churches. In fact, it's the same kind of position almost that they still hold, because they are the cohesive form of the black community. Many people who live outside of the black area still go to the black churches.
I think another institution I think that's very important, of course, are the schools. And moving ahead to take a look at, I think the first school we want to look at is the Lawhead School. And that was a neighborhood school. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, these were truly neighborhood schools for the most part.
Yes, it was. It was all black. It went to the 3rd grade, and it was the first black teachers were hired for their, when we went before they integrated, because we went to all white schools, but we had all white teachers, but we didn't have any black, any black teachers.
Hester, you eventually became a teacher and a principal.
Yes, in the old Booker T. Washington Elementary Magnet School,
the one they just
at that
tore
particular
down.
time.
That's right. How did you feel when they tore that down?
Well, I had mixed emotions. I think, progress is progress. And some of the kind of things the children will be able to be exposed to are really important and quite germane to the conditions now. And so as I said, I had mixed emotions, because if you spend 22 years in a place, you certainly do feel as if that's a part of your upbringing and a part of your heritage, and you feel a little bit down when it's torn down.
Sure. Let's take a look inside Gregory School, which was another of the neighborhood schools, and this was an integrated school.
Right.
White students and black students
Well,
stayed
that's
together.
that's the school we went to. In fact,
But it didn't look like that when we went. That's a little bit before our age.
well, I don't know, it looked kind of like that when I went there. I used to spend more time behind Mrs. Withers' desk than anybody.
Let's look at the next image that we have, which is a little bit more contemporary. It's probably in the 70s, and by this time they had started to integrate and bus students around town. One of the interesting things about education, we go to the University of Illinois. Let's go to the next picture, because I find this story to be really fascinating. This is a man by the name of Albert Lee. What can you tell us about Albert Lee?
Albert Lee is an icon as far as we're concerned. He was the secretary to the president of the University of Illinois. And he was the one that formed the fraternities, and he found places for the boys to live, because we weren't allowed to live on campus. When the kids came to school, we had to provide a place for them to stay in the homes, and he would contact the different homeowners and people out in town. And where I lived, there was 2 or 3 kids that stayed there, that went through school there. Of course, our family was just a big family, and since my Aunt Sadie graduated from there, and Frank was killed, he was from there. But Albert R. Lee he formed the Baraka clubs, he kept our churches moving, he brought the students off the campus into town, he found jobs for them, and he encouraged them to stay in school. A lot of the guys that had Supreme Life in Chicago and around, they all went to school here.
He was he the first black employee of the University of Illinois?
He was the only black employee in any capacity.
Let's look at the
outside of a mail carrier or something like that.
It's the documentation that came with that. The story was very, very interesting. Another aspect that we want to get into while we have time is the business community. There was a very distinct black business community. We'll take a look at the next image. This is actually, if you...
It's Heimlicher's Liquors there. This is a later story.
And that's actually
the old cattle
That's
bank.
the old cattle
building.
bank. Yeah.
So if
it
folks,
was Cattle Bank, and then it became Heimlicher's. It was Heimlicher's a long time.
and you look down First Street there to
Right.
Chuck and Dean's and some others. Let's look at the next of the business images that we have.
They had some others. I didn't have one, but I had one of Homer Chavis's cleaners out on Green Street.
This is some more along First Street, I believe.
Yeah.
But there was an African American business district along First Street. There was, you mentioned Poplar Street as well.
Poplar Street was where they had the hotel, the Columbia Hotel, and then the Mrs. Winfield, yes, Mrs. Winfield. They had taverns. They had the Top Hat. They had different eating restaurants and a lot of places to go.
Let's take a look at the next photo, which I think might surprise a few people. Here is an aerial photo, and if you look, this is the old train station at the bottom of the picture. Look across the tracks, and that is right in the center. The long building is a livery, but that's the location now of a city parking lot and, of course, the police department. And you have to look back a ways to find First Street, but that street there just to the left of the livery is it's Main Street, which really doesn't exist anymore except for the pedestrian underpass.
Well, also, if you notice in that particular photograph, the train cars that are there. So
the box cars.
The freight cars, yeah.
The freight cars went on both sides of the tracks.
So that's, for those who can orient themselves to where the police station is now, an entirely different look at the city and a very vibrant business district at the time.
But the old commercial bank was there. They had other businesses before this was torn down, because old commercial bank was there on University Avenue.
Yes, it was.
Let's take a look at the next image.
Oh.
This is one of the barber shops.
Yeah, that's my husband's barber shop. Well, actually, his uncle started the barber shop back, oh goodness, about 1919 or 1920. And then he took it up, and then he became a post office, and we sold it. But that was the barbering was a big business in Champaign. Barbering and hair, and we had hairdressers. We had our own businesses, really. So
let's take a look at the next image that we have, which is kind of a fun one. It's the price list for the barber shop, and you see a massage at 50 cents and a shampoo at 50 cents and shave at 35 and
the prices were high there, and they were at 10 cents at one point.
Now, of course, there were the black businesses, but what was the relationship with the other businesses in town?
Oh, well, at one time, the Fred's barber shop, before the 99th Pursuit Squadron came to town, and before the boys came up when they opened that, it was all white. Most of the black barber shops cut nothing but white hair. They only had white patrons. But then, after those boys came up on the trains, when they would come into town from Chanute and want their hair cut, and my husband told his grandfather, he said, his uncle he was working with, he said, look, you're going to have to let me cut hair in the daytime, because I'm not telling them to come back after dark. And of course, his uncle looked like he was real light and whatnot, all of them, the whole family, they were from Greenville and whatnot. But they were hunters, and they used to have hunting club, they had the farmers and whatnot came in. A lot of people knew them. But we had a few black barber shops, but only 2 or 3. And then when Fred took over the shop, he opened it up altogether. Then he had to train his uncle and them how to cut black hair, because they didn't know how to cut it. They had come from Greenville and whatnot, where most of them had all white patrons.
Let's take a look at this next picture, and this is a woman that many people might know.
Ah, that's Lucy.
Lucy Gray, who
ran
an antique, very elegant woman, ran an antique shop in what was the JBJ's building until fairly recently. And we We don't have a lot of time left, but we would be remiss if we didn't at least get into the 1960s, because of turmoil around the country. We'll look at the next image. And of course in Champaign-Urbana as well, with part of the civil rights movement. This is a protester outside of the J.C. Penney store in downtown Champaign. And we'll look at the next image, which was a protest on the quad
That's
on
on
campus.
the quad on campus, yeah. Well, we had quite a few protests. A lot of things went on then. That's when the 500 was first came here.
So the Project 500, which we discussed in a previous episode relative to the University of Illinois, where space was made in the program for 500 African American students to come and enroll.
Yeah, that's true. And then of course we had the uproar and the riots. They call it riots, but I guess it was just. But I would have felt bad too if I didn't have any place to stay after they invited me here to go to school, and then tell me that you have to find some place to stay. Well, that had to stop.
Well, thank both of you for being here tonight. We've really enjoyed it, and the time has gone very, very quickly for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Estella Merrifield and Hester Suggs for their insight on the history of African Americans in the city of Champaign. As we continue to look at our 150 years of Champaign history, join us next time for a look at sports in Champaign. From legendary high school teams and coaches to the University of Illinois, to more than our fair share of Olympians and Paralympians, Champaign's athletic tradition runs deep. So join us for the next episode of Illinois Pioneers. Until next time, I'm Rick Atterbury. Thanks for watching.